Hey, it's Steph, and welcome to the Straight Up with Steph podcast, where we have real discussions around health and life and just trying to be better at both. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Straight Up with Steph. I'm Steph, your host, practicing dental hygienist and ergonomic specialist. Today, I wanted to do something a little different and speak to new grads or people who are just in their first year or two of practice. I've been practicing about 16 years, and when I look back to that time when I was a new grad or even in my first few years of practice, there's so many things that I wish I would have known back then that could have really helped me. So I want to share some of my personal insight with you. I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was born and raised there, but I went to hygiene school in Anchorage. Graduated in 2008. I worked there clinically for about a year or so, and then I moved down to Denver, Colorado. And just for reference, when I graduated from Anchorage, I got my associates, and I ended up going back to school and completing my bachelor's degree a few years ago with an online degree completion program. Graduating from dental hygiene school is a huge accomplishment. I mean, it's been a while since I was in school, but I still remember how freaking hard it was. So it is a big deal when we graduate, and it's really exciting. But it can be shocking and sometimes frustrating when we start getting out into practice because things we learned in school or different techniques or even the time that we had with our patient in school is much different versus private practice. So it can be kind of shocking when we get out there to work. Today, I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about things that we might encounter when we start working at different offices. And then I want to talk about things outside of the operatory. When I was probably my first decade of practice, I had tunnel vision. I was just focused on practicing clinically, taking care of patients, and that was it. But there's a whole world outside of clinical practice still within dentistry that's huge. And if we don't get out there and explore it, we don't even really know that it's there. So I want to talk about things like going to conferences and the importance of networking. And then because I'm an ergonomic specialist and I still work on patients, I want to talk about ergonomics and specifically some products. There's a few products that I wish I would have had as a new grad or even when I was in school that could have really helped me, especially helped me prevent some of the musculoskeletal issues that I ended up with. So we'll talk about what I think are some really important ergonomic products that I think everyone should start using as soon as possible. Let's talk about transitioning from school to working in actual dental practices. Not everything we learn in school directly translates to working in practice, and that can be kind of shocking, especially the time. When I look back, I think on my clinical days, I had one patient in the morning, and one patient in the afternoon. So I had 3 to 4 hours per patient. Plenty of time to disinfect your room, put barriers up, do your chart notes, do sterilization. When we get out into practice, I would say the average is about an hour per patient, depending on what you're doing, but some offices don't even get that much time. So that's a huge learning curve when we get out into the real world. Infection control is a big one, and infection control and things like OSHA, those are things that are really important for us, not just to protect ourselves, but also to protect our patients. When we're in school, we're taught the gold standard as far as disinfecting our room, using barriers, and having enough time to do all of that. When you get out into practice, you will see not all offices adhere to what we are taught in school or even what OSHA recommends. If you go into an office and see that they aren't following OSHA standards, decide if that's something that is going to sit okay with you. Over my years of practice, I have learned that a lot of practices are open to feedback, especially about infection control and OSHA. They just might not have the bandwidth to do it themselves. Maybe they don't have time to learn on what the rules are, and they need someone to kind of help them along. This might be like a side thing that you could do in addition to your regular duties, is you could help to establish an OSHA program. If that's something you want to do, and if that's something the office is looking for, that could be a great fit. And you would be providing even more value than that of a dental hygienist because you'd be helping them build up an OSHA program. But if you run into an office that isn't following OSHA rules and they really have no interest in changing their ways, is this something that you can go home and sleep at night, that you can look past? If not, we're in a good position right now. And I mean, this isn't good with the staffing shortage and all of these offices needing help, but it is good from an employment standpoint, because if you find an office that really isn't the best fit for you, there are so many other offices out there to choose from. And just know, likely your first office or maybe your first few offices outside of school likely aren't going to be your forever home. Like I said, I've been practicing for 16 years. It took me a long time and a lot of offices to go through before I found one that really fit my philosophy and the standards that I think are important. So it can take a while, but it's not likely you're going to land on that your very first job out of practice. So don't let that discourage you. There's so many offices out there. I've worked in offices that had atrocious infection control and they weren't really interested in changing. I've worked in offices where there was outright fraud happening, where insurance was being billed for things that weren't being done. I've had my paycheck bounce. And believe it or not, I worked for an office that as a side gig, they were selling sex toys at the front desk. But I did find an amazing office that I worked at for almost 10 years, and nothing's perfect, but it really fit my standards as far as what was important to me, and one that pretty much checked all of the boxes that I was looking for. So they are out there. Just don't get discouraged. We hear a lot these days about toxic offices. Unfortunately, yes, there are offices like that out there, but I think this word toxic is being thrown around a bit too much for things that aren't actually toxic. Like I'll see in certain Facebook groups, especially around the holidays, people complaining that their office doesn't give them any kind of holiday bonus, and then they label this office as toxic. I don't think that's toxic. I think of a toxic office as one that you feel in your gut, like you feel it. Maybe you feel sick when you get up in the morning, feel sick on your way to work. Maybe you cry over your lunch break or cry after work and you dread going back in. That's that feeling that I'm talking about, where you go in and you just feel completely disrespected, not appreciated, and you don't feel like part of the team. You know that saying that people might not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel? That's what I think of as a toxic office. It's this feeling that you have in your body about that practice. Here's some red flags that I've noticed throughout my career that I think you should look out for. If you're at an office where there's a lot of gossip, a lot of backstabbing, maybe not any teamwork, those are red flags. A common example of this is the divide that sometimes we see between the front office and the back office. The front refuses to help the back, and the back refuses to help the front. I think that's a red flag. You want to be someplace where there's mutual support and respect for every position, not just the front versus the back, but even between assistants, dental hygienists, and dentists. It should be this collaborative effort to get through the day and to help patients. It shouldn't be assistants versus hygienists or doctors versus hygienists or the back versus the front. It shouldn't be that type of environment. I'm very fortunate to work at a practice now where it is a literal team effort. The front is working really hard to support the back, and the back is working really hard to support the front. We're both trying to help each other with the joint goal of increasing production, providing really good patient care, and just trying to get through the day and have a little bit of fun. Now let's talk about equipment. If you're being forced to use really old, outdated, or broken equipment and the office is not receptive on getting new things, this might be a deal breaker for you. It would be a deal breaker for me, and it has been in the past. I'm a huge advocate of clinicians investing in themselves with purchasing your own loupes, investing in your own saddle stool, maybe even getting instruments. I remember my first year outside of dental hygiene school, I worked at a practice and they didn't use the kind of instruments that I learned on in school that I really preferred. They were not open in getting new instruments, and it was a no-brainer for me to just purchase my own instruments. I got all of my own instruments, all of my own kits, and it was nice because I knew that I was comfortable using those instruments. I don't know about you, but it's much more fun for me to use instruments that I'm really familiar with and that I like versus instruments I don't know how to use or that aren't comfortable for me. And they were mine. I was able to take them with me when I left. And because they were mine, I could label them, no one else can use them, and they were all for me, which I actually preferred. Yeah, it's a little bit of money out of pocket, but the payoff was worth it to me. But I've worked in, and I've seen this in assessments too, where you have maybe it was an old closet or an old panel room that's been transitioned into an operatory. And there's just piecemeal stuff in there to kind of mimic an operatory, but it's not ergonomic and it's really hard to use. I think in that situation, it's absolutely warranted for you to go to the practice owner or the office manager and ask for an actual functioning operatory. We all deserve to work in a space that's ergonomic, that we're not going to hurt ourselves because we're working on it. But for things like loupes or even a stool, sure, it would be great if the office could contribute to that, but be prepared for them not to. And be prepared to invest in that on your own. There's no better feeling than investing in yourself and your health. Plus, those things are yours and you can take them with you when you decide to go to a different office. And let's just talk about gossiping for a second. If you're out of practice and there's a lot of gossip going around, to me, that's a huge red flag. And that's a big red flag for me outside of practice too, like in certain friend groups, or even if I'm at a networking event and there's a lot of gossip going around, I don't want to have any part of that. It's not good for the practice. It's not good for morale. That type of mentality tends to be toxic. And for me and my mental health, it's not something I want to engage in. And just remember, people who are gossiping with you likely are gossiping about you. Now, let's talk about some good things to look out for. You want to look for a supportive environment in the practice where there's teamwork, where there's really good communication between everyone in the practice. If any of you follow me on social media, you know that I like to use humor. I think humor is a great thing to have in the practice. It really lightens the mood. It creates some really good energy, and it just helps the day go by faster without drama. If you think about it, between the ages of like 20 and 60, we're spending the most time with our coworkers. And do you want to spend that with people who are gossiping or backstabbing each other? Or do you want to spend it with people who like to joke around, have a good time, and you know that they're going to be there when you need help? Some other things to look out for is the office is really supportive when it comes to taking CE. They want you to learn new things. They're supportive of you taking time off because they know how important it is for us to spend time with our friends and family. They're open to feedback about getting new equipment, maybe getting new instruments, or fixing things in a timely manner when they're broken, and also are open to changes in the schedule. I have some patients where I can get through their appointment in 40 minutes, no problem. And then I have another patient that takes 90 minutes. I mean, it's not cookie cutter with our patients. They all have different needs. So at this practice that I was at for almost 10 years, I had full autonomy over my schedule, and I could shorten appointment times if I needed to and lengthen them when I needed to, no questions asked. I think that's a really good thing to have in a practice. But when we're talking about things that are broken, that need to get fixed, maybe getting new instruments, we have to be responsible and tell them what we need. They are not mind readers. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, but a lot of times we make wrong assumptions on how we're being treated in the practice. If we're not getting enough time with our patients, if we're not speaking up about it, maybe our manager has no idea that we need more time with these people. Or if we're dealing with really dull or broken instruments, if we're not talking about it to the manager, they have no idea. Many times the person running the practice, like the practice owner or the office manager, isn't necessarily a trained clinician, so they don't really know what we're dealing with in the back. And they've got their own things to deal with up front. So if we aren't being really open and communicative with them, how are they supposed to know what we need? Just an example for you, a friend of mine was at an office for a while and she was really unhappy that she only got 30 minutes for lunch. She wanted an hour, she only got 30 minutes. It took her forever to even bring it up or say anything. And the whole time she thought it's because the office didn't care about her, didn't respect her, or they just wanted to milk like every last minute out of her. When she finally said something to the office manager had no idea that it was a problem. And she had said the previous hygienist wanted just 30 minutes so that she could get off 30 minutes early. So that schedule just kind of carried over to my friend. Once my friend said something, they changed it immediately. They lengthened her lunch and it was no big deal. So this is what I mean. They cannot read our minds. If we're not speaking up, they have no idea. Now, if we do speak up and say something and then they choose not to do anything about that or choose not to listen to us, that's a whole nother conversation. But most of the time, people are not intentionally coming to work to like ruin our day or make our lives miserable. We have to speak up. And this goes with boundaries too. We have to decide what is really important to us, what's a deal breaker, and what are things that we can live with. If you're at an office and you're only getting 45 minutes per patient and that's not enough time for you, is that a deal breaker for you? It's well within your rights to go speak to the office manager or whoever's running the practice and say what you need. If they can't give you what you need, is that a deal breaker? We have to be really clear with our boundaries. A boundary for me is time. If I'm not allowed to have enough time for patients, and like I mentioned earlier, some patients need a lot more time than others, that forces me to give substandard care to the patient. That is an absolute hard pass, deal breaker boundary for me. And if I'm at an office where there's a lot of gossip and backstabbing and just like negative vibes, my mental health is way too important to me and I'm not going to deal with that. So I'll look for another practice. If we're at an office that violates those boundaries, we need to be prepared to make a change. Another note about offices is pay and compensation. We're in a staffing shortage since COVID. And I've seen what people are making per hour now. And it's a lot more than when I graduated hygiene school. I'll tell you that. But just know that the hourly pay is not the end all be all. That's not the only thing we should be looking at when we're interviewing or considering an office. Look at the schedule. Do you have autonomy over your schedule? Can you increase appointment times if you need to? Are you working accelerated or assisted hygiene? Depending on people, that's a deal breaker for them. How many patients are you seeing a day? What expectations do they have of you during the appointment? I've worked at some offices where my only expectation is to be a hygienist. And I've worked at other offices where, in addition to being a hygienist, I'm also responsible for putting together the treatment plan, going over treatment, and talking to them about payment options. And look at the benefits. Do they allow time off, whether it's paid or not? Do they offer any kind of 401k, health insurance? Do they reimburse you for CE? I've walked away from practices that offer a really high hourly wage, but because of their complete lack of benefits, or maybe I was seeing some of those red flags during the working interview, I've walked away from them. So just know that the hourly compensation isn't the end all be all. Something else, I mentioned this earlier, but in school, we're allowed so much time with our patients. I mean, hours. And then we get out into practice and we're allowed maybe an hour if we're lucky, but sometimes less. I didn't learn a whole lot about time management when I was in school. And when I got out of school, it was like a slap in the face as far as how fast we had to get everything done. In school, we had plenty of time. We also had a floating assistant that was around to help us. We were allowed to, spray, disinfect our room, put up our barriers, do all of our chart notes, all of that. When we get out into practice, it's up to us to figure out how to get all of that stuff done well and in a very short amount of time. Here's some tips that have helped me over the years, and I hope they can help you too. As far as chart notes, these can be a time suck and they can take up a big chunk of our day, especially if we're waiting till the end of the day to fill out all of our chart notes. I honestly don't know how people wait till the end of the day or even at lunch to fill out their chart notes. If I'm seeing a patient at 8 a.m., by 10 a.m., I can't remember what I did at 8 a.m. So I don't know how people do that. Something that's helped me is chart note templates. A lot of practice management software have these already made, or you can customize them and make them your own so that when you click on the note, it pulls up a template. You just have to fill them in for that patient and it just makes it go a lot faster. When I bring a patient into the operatory, I have that template already up and I'm plugging in the information as I can throughout the appointment. Maybe I'll fill it out a little bit when the patient is pre-rinsing or I'm taking their blood pressure. Waiting for them to get numb is a great time to put in some of your notes. When you're waiting for the doctor, obviously that's a great time to start working on your chart notes. And when the doctor comes in for the exam, that's where I enter the majority of my chart notes. Because the dentist is usually chatting up the patient, which is a minute or two. So you can get a lot of notes done in that time. And then when the dentist is doing their exam, you can also start filling out the chart notes. So I try to get as much done as I can during the appointment. And if there's anything else that I need to add later, I'll write it on a little sticky note so I remember to put it in later. As far as tearing down my room, I will start that before the patient's even left the operatory. Usually the dentist comes in after I'm doing what I need to do. And so when the dentist is chatting with the patient or doing the exam, I'm removing barriers and disinfecting things that I know I'm not going to use again after that. It just gives you a little bit of a head start. I try to organize things into the cassette. I'll take the suction off, the barrier off. I'll wipe that area down and just try to get as much done before you dismiss the patient so you have less to do when you come back into the room. And I'm a hygienist, and I say this with love, but hygienists talk way too much. We eat a lot of the appointment time just by chatting with our patients. And I know it's important for us to build that rapport and build that relationship, but we can build that while also doing other things. If we're sitting and just having a one-on-one conversation with our patient for 5, 10, 15 minutes and not getting anything else done, it's no wonder we're so stressed out and we aren't able to get everything done because we used the first quarter of the appointment just chatting with our patient. So with my patients, I'll be chatting with them when I tip them back in the chair. I'll chat with them a little bit when I'm doing the oral cancer screening or when I'm hand scaling their teeth or when I'm setting them back up. So we can still chat with them and get stuff done at the same time. Like I said, this isn't necessarily taught in school. I'm sure all schools are different. I didn't get a whole lot of this education when I was in school, but there's courses that people have developed on time management and becoming more efficient if you need extra help in that area. When you're first starting out, just be a sponge and learn from your experienced coworkers. A lot of times we're working with people who've been doing this for a minute and we can learn a lot from them. Just be open and receptive to what they have to teach you and also watch what they're doing. I learned so much in my first couple of years of practice, just as much, if not more, than what I learned in school. This was from learning from the dentist, the assistants and the hygienists that I was working with. Another thing is try to let go of perfectionism. We're all perfectionists. That's what makes us really good at what we do in dentistry. But a lot of times we have this unrealistic standard that we're never going to get to. Let's talk about perio. If we've got a patient that comes in, sub-G calculus, 8mm pockets, and we try to be a hero and do scaling and root planing on that patient, we all know the studies say over and over that we're only effective up to 6mm. And even at 6mm, it's a little dicey, let alone 7, 8 plus. So don't try to kill yourself and do a perfect job on these patients. We're trying to do the best we can. And as hygienists, we're working blind for the most part. So as long as our patient is leaving better off than what they came in, then we're doing a good job. But just try not to be a perfectionist. You're going to miss calculus. You're going to have a scaling and root planing patient that comes back and you take their 6-month x-rays and you see calculus that you missed. It's going to happen. It's happened to me. It's going to happen to you. We're going to miss the apex on teeth when we're taking PAs. It's not the end of the world. We're trying to do the best we can in the situation that we're in. We're also going to have patients that don't care to see us again. And I remember when this first happened to me, I took it so personally. I thought I was a failure. I thought I was doing something wrong. Not everyone's going to be a good fit for us, and that's okay. Not everyone is going to love us. Not everyone is going to appreciate how hard we're working, and that's okay. So don't beat yourself up if you have a patient that complains about you, that leaves you a bad review, or doesn't want to see you again. It's a numbers game, and we can't please everyone. So every now and then we are going to have patients that don't care for us, and that's okay. As long as we know that we're doing everything we can, that's all that matters. My last tip for working in practice is do not care more than your patients do about their health. And this was a really tough thing for me to learn, especially as a new clinician. I used to think when my patients would come in and they haven't improved their home care or they refuse treatment, like if they refuse to get their caries addressed or refuse to get this huge crack fixed with a crown, I used to think that was my fault. I would take the responsibility because I thought I wasn't explaining it well, or there was something I was doing that wasn't expressing the urgency for them to get this done. Don't do that. Do not take that upon yourself. It's way too much responsibility for us and it adds way too much stress. We cannot care more than our patients do. Our job is to assess them, to educate them, to let them know the consequences of not following through with treatment and let them choose. It's their choice. We can care for our patients and we can be empathetic with them, but don't take their care as your responsibility because they're adults for the most part, and it's their choice on if they want to care for themselves or not. All right, so let's talk about things beyond the operatory now. I want to talk about the importance of networking and going to conferences. I learned the value of networking really late. Really late. I actually didn't start taking it seriously until I started my business a few years ago. So I was 13 years into practice by the time I realized how important it was to get out there and network with people and get to know other professionals in your field. For me, and I know this might not be the same for you, but for me, many of the practices that I've worked in throughout my career were single hygienist offices, smaller practices, and I was the only hygienist. This can be lonely. I mean, you've got the dentist to talk to and the assistants and front office and everything, but it's different than talking to another hygienist. So I almost felt that I was in a silo and I felt very lonely at times. And I couldn't talk about hygiene stuff with anyone. And I'm older, so I didn't grow up with social media. And I really didn't even get into social media until I started my business a few years ago. Had I had social media, I would have realized that a lot of other people were probably struggling with the same issues that I was. But because I didn't engage with social, I did feel very alone. If I had networked back then, either in person, going to events, or engaging in social media more with other dental hygienists or other dental professionals, I would have realized that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one struggling with these things. And I would have felt more connected back then. And that was my fault. That was my bad because I didn't go to conferences and I didn't really value networking back then. I did eventually get involved in my local hygiene association here in Colorado, which did open my eyes to the value of networking and of connecting with other hygienists in my area. Social media is a way to network, but it's a double-edged sword. I think that it can be a really useful tool if you manage it and use it correctly. The flip side of that is when we aren't being responsible with the content that we're consuming, it can really affect us negatively. I encourage people to really watch who they follow. When I'm on social media and the accounts I choose to follow are either my friends in the field or it's an account that's actually teaching me something. I really want to grow and I want to learn and I want to advance as much as I can. So the accounts I follow help me do that. If I'm scrolling through and I see an account that either makes me feel bad about myself or I have a negative reaction to, I immediately unfollow that person. We don't need that type of content in our life. So just be very responsible with who you're following on social media. Who you surround yourself with, either in person or like virtually, like social media, can really shape who we are. I mean, we are who we hang out with the most. If you're surrounded, like if you've got a friend group that has a lot of pessimism and negativity and gossiping, or you are following accounts on social media that make you feel bad about yourself or just make you kind of get into this negative mood, that can ultimately shape your perspective and your mentality on life. And we don't want to be negative. We don't want to feel bad about ourselves. So just be very deliberate with who you hang out with and who you choose to follow on social media. Just to tell you about me, I am a pretty sensitive person and I tend to pick up on the energy of the people around me. So I am very deliberate with who I choose to spend time with. And to be honest, it's not a whole lot of people. If I'm at a networking event and I find myself in a group of people who are either gossiping about someone or just being really negative, I literally try to escape as quick as I can, because I will pick up on that energy. And that's the kind of energy I don't want in my life. And with gossiping, I've heard it's a way, especially for women, to like connect with each other and to bond with each other. And while that may be true, there's other ways that we can connect with each other. And I always remember the people who are gossiping with me or around me, right when I turn my back, I bet you they're gossiping about me too. Another thing that's really important as a new grad is to take CE and take a lot of CE. And I'm a huge fan of going outside of your area to take CE, investing in yourself, traveling to a conference that's outside of your like area where you live in. You're going to be exposed to so much more content and different people, and the networking at these events is awesome. And with CE, obviously I like taking dental CE, and we need to take dental CE so that we stay current with things. But I also like to take CE that's outside of dentistry. I take some on business now, on technology, on mindfulness, on meditation, on systemic health, on nutrition. All of that, it's interesting. It gives us the CE, but it also makes us more well-rounded as both people and dental clinicians. So don't just focus on dental CE only. Taking CE is really important, obviously for new grads, but even for more seasoned clinicians like myself, we tend to experience some burnout at some point in our career, and taking a really good CE course, no matter what topic it is, if it lights us up, that can lift us out of this burnout and really help us be motivated and be more engaged with our job again. If you're thinking about doing things outside of clinical practice, like becoming a KOL, a key opinion leader for a brand, a social media content creator or influencer, a speaker, or maybe starting your own business, networking is huge. It really matters who you know. And I didn't realize that until a few years ago, but it's true. These dental conferences or these trade shows is a great opportunity to do that, because you've got all of these really influential people in your field in the same area at the same time. And going to some of these networking events and networking parties, you're going to meet so many people that can help you either then or years later. I've been going to these networking events for a while, and you meet people and you talk with them, and that's great. And you may not have any kind of like job opportunity or collaboration right then, but I've had things happen years later because I just met someone a few years ago. So you never know when that networking is going to pay off, but it always pays off. I want to wrap it up with how you can better take care of yourself as a new grad. And I'm an ergonomic specialist, so yes, I'm going to talk to you about ergonomics, but it really is so important. If you think about it, our body is our most important and most valuable instrument we have. If we aren't taking care of our body and we aren't investing in it and maintaining it, we're going to end up with an injury or pain or fatigue or burnout or depression. It's just not worth it. So we really need to take a minute and learn what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And this is something else I learned way too late. I've not always been ergonomic. The first 10 years of my career, I really wasn't. And man, after that 10-year mark, I really developed some pain, injury, and it really started affecting my mental health as well. That's why I'm so passionate on talking about ergonomics now. And I think the earlier you can start thinking about it and investing in these really good ergonomic products, the better for you. Depending on what school you went to, maybe they focused on ergonomics, maybe they didn't. I've heard of schools that have competencies that require their students to pass them before like going on to the next thing. I think that's awesome. I wish that was standardized throughout all of schools, and it's my hope that eventually it will be, but right now it's not. It's really just a crapshoot on if you learn ergonomics or not in school. So sometimes when I'm doing assessments on people, it's really breaking these bad habits that they've developed because they didn't really learn that much about it in school. It's my experience when I'm doing speaking events or working with people on assessments or even some of my social media like how-to videos. It's my opinion that most people have not gotten adequate training in ergonomics. They don't know about positioning, they don't know about posture, and they don't know about these really good ergonomic products that can help them. If you just do a Google search on dentist or dental hygienist, you will see hundreds of photos of people just hunched over, and this should not be the norm. When we're in school, we're usually taught on one operatory layout, and just FYI, there's a lot of different op layouts out there. So when we get out of school, maybe we're working on that op layout that we learned about, but a lot of times we aren't, and then we're not really trained on how to use that layout ergonomically. So we just try to figure it out. And by figuring it out, I mean, we're like twisting ourselves into a pretzel because we don't understand how to use the equipment. So taking the time to invest in an ergonomic CE, I offer them, but there's other people that offer them as well. Getting an assessment, and there's several of us that offer these, but it really helps because we're able to help you figure out how you can use your operatory layout in the best way possible so that you're not twisting a million times a day or reaching a million times a day. It really helps you out. If I had my way, every clinician would have at least one assessment done so that they would kind of know what their habits are, and then they can learn how to correct them. But if you're not working ergonomically, let me tell you, I mean, it's not going to feel good. You're going to be exhausted by the end of the day. You're putting yourself at risk for an injury. You could miss days off of work. You might need a surgery. You might have to leave the op altogether, all because we haven't learned how to practice ergonomically. But once you learn ergonomics and learn things like neutral posture and how to avoid reaching and twisting, you can take that with you to any operatory you might face in the future. Let's talk about ergonomic products. It is so important to invest in yourself. And I understand some of these products are not cheap. It's an investment, but it's an investment in you, and it's an investment in your health and your longevity in the field. So let's take ergonomic loupes for an example. I'm not talking about any kind of loop, and I hate to say this, but not all loupes are ergonomic. I have a whole episode on ergonomic loupes that I'll link down below where you can learn more. But the ergonomic loupes I'm talking about are the prismatic deflection loupes. When you look at the scope, that's like the little binocular in the glasses, and it comes out and then it points down. Those are the loupes that I'm talking about. Check out that episode if you want to learn more. I wish these were available back when I was in hygiene school. They weren't, but they are now. I think these are a no-brainer for anyone practicing dentistry. And I do recommend loupes for dentists, any kind of specialist, hygienists, and also dental assistants. If we're using loupes or not using loupes at all, we're in something called neck flexion. That's when our neck is pointed down because we need to literally point our head down to look at our patient. These ergonomic loupes eliminate that. You can have your head fully upright. It actually looks like you're looking straight ahead, but because of the scopes, you can see down into the patient's mouth. These are the loupes that are truly ergonomic, and I do recommend them for everyone. We only have one neck. And neck injury and neck pain is one of the leading causes of issues for dental clinicians. So using a loop like this virtually eliminates those problems. Investing in ergonomic loupes like this, and yes, it is an investment, but this will save you money and pain and fatigue for years to come. So it's like 1,000 times worth the investment. And what about our stool? Sometimes we don't think about our stool. We go into an office and we just use the stool that's provided for us. But did you know that stools are very individualized? It's like a pair of pants. So if I were to give you a pair of jeans, would you expect all of your friends to be able to fit into that pair of jeans? Probably not. But yet we do that with stools. A lot of times we have the same exact stool for all of our operatories in the office. And yeah, it might fit a couple people, but it's not going to fit everyone. If we're sitting on a stool that is not ergonomic or that doesn't fit us, it's going to cause issues for us over time. And just think how long you're actually sitting on your stool. It's like hours a day, and add that up at the end of a month or 6 months or a year. That's a lot of time on our stool. So we want to make sure it's something that actually fits us. If you're perching on the edge of your stool, it doesn't fit you. If the stool is digging into the back of your leg or hitting the back of your knees, it doesn't fit you. If your stool doesn't allow you to have your hips above your knees, it doesn't fit you. If you want to learn more about stools, I'll link my podcast episode all about stools down below as well. There's a lot more information there. And yes, it would be great if our office purchased an ergonomic stool for us. It would be nice, but it doesn't always happen. So I'm a strong supporter of clinicians investing in their own stool. And yes, this is an investment, but it's your health and it's yours, and you can take it with you no matter where you go. When I was temping, I probably showed up looking like a psycho because I had my big bag that had my Ergonomic Loupes, instruments, cordless polisher, and suction devices. We'll talk about those in a second. And then I had my saddle stool that I would carry with me. But I've been on the other side of experiencing pain because of poor ergonomics, and I don't ever want to do that again. So it's worth the investment for me buying all those things, and it's worth the hassle of carting it around with me too. What about other devices like suction devices, ergonomic instruments, and cordless polishers? Suction devices are so important, and there's so many out there. So when I say a suction device, I mean a hands-free device that will allow you to provide suction for your patient. You don't have to hold on to it, so you can use your handpiece or your power scaler and hold your mirror in your non-dominant hand. If we're holding on to the suction, I have a whole episode on that as well. If you want to check out the episode on wrist and hand health, I'll link that below, but I talk more about ergonomic instruments and suction devices. But if we're holding on to the suction, we're out here in chicken wing, we're not giving our arm a break, that is a lot of strain for the non-dominant hand. So if you experience any pain in your non-dominant hand, you might want to check out that episode. Suction devices are huge. So are ergonomic instruments. For an instrument to be ergonomic, we want the handle to be nice and fat. We want it to be light, and we want it to be textured because that reduces the amount of force that we need when we're holding on to it. Again, much more information on that in the episode down below about wrist and hand health. And cordless polishers. I've been using one of these for the past couple years, and I will never go back unless something crazy happens and I have to. But you don't realize how hard that cord is pulling against you until it's not there anymore. If you think about using a corded polisher, that hose is really heavy. The actual handpiece is heavy. So we're fighting against that as we're polishing our patient's teeth. That strain is going to add up over time. So using something like a cordless polisher is huge. If your office buys it for you, great. If not, there's ways that you can buy one yourself. With cordless polishers, there's all kinds of different ones out there now. There's ones where you can use the foot pedal. There's some where you can use the foot pedal or a button on the handle, which is really nice. I do recommend standing. So that's a really nice option if you're polishing and standing. Or you have polishers that there is no foot pedal and you just rely on the button. A lot of different choices. Some of them accept any kind of prophy angle. Some you have to use their prophy angle, but just know that there's a lot of options out there now. And I understand each one of these is an expense. Loupes, saddle stools, and cordless polishers, those aren't cheap, but they're an investment in ourselves. So it doesn't hurt to ask your practice if they're willing to provide this for you. Maybe you could present a proposal to them that if you hit this certain production goal, they'll provide this for you. Or instead of a bonus or a holiday bonus, they'll instead purchase this for you. It's a tax write-off for them, and then it's a benefit for you. But just be prepared for them to say no and think of what your plan B is. You might have to invest in one thing at a time. It might take you a few years to do this, but I promise you, you will never regret investing in yourself and your health. Sometimes clinicians rely on their office to buy them things, and then when their office doesn't buy it, that's the end of the road and they don't pursue it anymore. We don't want to put our health and our longevity and our well-being in the hands of someone else. We have the power to control that. There's so many other things that I wish I would have known as a new grad, but these are the things that really come to mind. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to enter what you wish you knew in the comments. I'd love to hear it, but I hope this advice helped you. If you're finding this content helpful, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or follow my show wherever you're listening to your podcast. I really appreciate you being here, and I'll talk to you soon.